If you grew up in the church, you might have heard that the Bible condemns homosexuality. What? But what if we've been reading it all wrong? Let's talk about Genesis 19, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Hi, I'm Jim. I'm a real-life pastor and an amateur runner, and we're going to talk about Genesis 19, the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. Because a lot of times Christians, for some reason, think that God destroyed Sodom and Gomorrah because of homosexuality, but that's not actually what the Bible even says. So let's take a closer look. So we find the story in Genesis 19, verses 1 through 11, I think. And Lot, who is Abraham's nephew, has left Abraham to go his own way. And he went to the big city, leaving Abraham for the wilderness. That's another story. So Lot and his family, they are in Sodom, and a couple of angels show up. Now, these angels have been chatting with Abraham in, I think, the previous chapter. You can go back and read that one. The angels are sent to the city to destroy it. That's the story, but not because of homosexuality, because of lack of hospitality. So the angels show up, and the crowds are like, give us these strangers so we can have sex with them, because that's an awkward welcoming committee and not very hospitable. Now, Lot has welcomed these strangers in. He was giving them shelter. He was being hospitable. And he says, here, take my daughters instead. What? Not your best move, Lot. The story continues. Lot's family leaves the town, and the angels do their smiting. What? And that's the story. It's not about homosexuality. It's about hospitality. This story in Genesis 19 isn't the only time that we hear about the sin of Sodom. In fact, Ezekiel 16:49 tells us exactly what it is. It's excess. It's a neglect of the poor and the needy. It doesn't say anything about sexual orientation or who's sleeping with who. It talks about who is caring for who is welcoming the stranger, the foreigner, the marginalized, the oppressed, and what are you doing with what God's given you? And when you misuse what God's given you, when you push away the stranger, the foreigner, the immigrant, those who are looking for shelter, that's the sin of Sodom. There's also a really similar story in Judges 19 where a woman's looking for shelter and she's sexually assaulted, which once again reminds us this story is about sexual power, not about sexual orientation. Or Matthew 10 where Jesus mentions Sodom, but once again, Jesus is talking about, are you being hospitable to those in need? It's almost like the Bible tells us what the sin of Sodom is, and it has nothing to do with homosexuality. Really, it reminds me of this one time when I was a kid. We were living in a parsonage, which is the house next to the church where the pastor lives. My dad was a pastor, and I'm like 8 or 9 years old, and someone knocks on the front door. It's like a teenage girl and her younger sister who's about my age. My parents entered the door, and the big sister was looking for a place that the little sister could go to the bathroom because she had to pee, like really bad. And what do my parents do? They say, come on in. You can use our bathroom. They were hospitable. Someone was in need, and so they welcomed her in. Now, they could have said, no, get out of here. This is our house, our bathroom. Go pee your pants on the sidewalk. And that would have been the sin of Sodom. A lack of hospitality, an inability to welcome someone in just because you want to stay cozy and comfortable and you don't want to help them in their discomfort, in their time of need. Or think about in our world today, all of the families who are just looking for a safe place to call home for their kids, for the future. And they're met by ICE agents pounding on their doors, hounding them at school or at work, and then deporting them from a place that they thought would have been safe and welcoming. So if we're looking for the sin of Sodom, you don't got to look at who's kissing who, but maybe who's deporting who. Yikes! When it comes to Genesis 19 and the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, the Bible clearly tells us what it's all about. The problem just might be that we aren't actually listening to what the Bible says. Oh, we'll be back next week with Leviticus. There's 2 passages in Leviticus that, once again, we read the wrong way. See you next week.